Today, I want to talk to you guys about intestinal parasites in puppies. And specifically, I want to cover two important parasites that are extremely common and extremely problematic in puppies. One is Giardia and two is Coccidia. But I also want to cover a few others and maybe take a bigger picture approach to parasites in general. And I want to talk about tapeworms, hookworms, lungworms, roundworms, and whipworms, which all can be found in puppies at some time or another. And I imagine that you are coming to this video for information, and quite possibly maybe you are researching for a future bulldog puppy just for information and trying to learn more about bulldogs, or quite possibly maybe one of your bulldogs has contracted a parasite or tested positive for a parasite. Either way, hopefully this video can give you a little bit of information about parasites in specific and kind of give you a viewpoint of a bulldog breeder that's been breeding for 15 years and some of the things that we have learned in that 15-year process. The starting point in understanding parasites and parasites in your puppies is understanding the broad life cycle of a parasite in general. And I wanted to kind of explain that through this chart, just how a parasite acts, what their life cycle is, and what their relationship historically has been with the canine breed, whether it be a wolf, a wild dog, or a bulldog like Kronk. So the starting point with any parasite, and we are generalizing this, right? So we are taking Giardia, we're taking Coccidia, we're taking all the other worms, and we're kind of bunching them together. So some of these terms, some of the characteristics are going to be generalized. With a worm, you talk about an egg. With Coccidia and Giardia, we'd talk about a cyst. And there's different mechanisms of reproduction. Giardia and Coccidia reproduce asexually, whereas tapeworms actually lay eggs and they hatch. But we're gonna be kind of generalizing this understanding because we just need to understand how a parasite works, how it lives, what its life cycle looks like. And if we can understand that, we can better understand what a treatment looks like. How do we get rid of parasites? So the starting point with any parasite is it is ingested by a dog. And they can ingest a parasite in a number of different ways. It's usually out in the environment. The biggest thing to understand is that there are parasites everywhere. It's incredibly common. We as humans know that if we go to a different country, if we drink different types of water, we can get a parasite. But usually it's found in different types of environment. One common place is grass. Another, probably the most common, is infected water, infected dishes, water that's been sitting, groundwater that's been sitting, a mud puddle or something. And then the other most common way to ingest a parasite is through feces. And we know it's disgusting, but we know dogs sometimes eat their own poop. And that is not, it's bad in a number of different ways, but one of the most problematic issues is that it perpetuates the parasite issue. And so the first stage of a parasite life cycle is ingestion. And so we see a dog will ingest a parasite, either an egg or a cyst, out in the environment, out in the wild. What happens then along this life cycle is that either the eggs or the cysts are then activated. So when they're in the environment, the reason they're so hardy is they are actually dormant. They have the ability to become dormant. Once they become ingested, they become activated, they move down in the intestinal tract of your dog, and then they enter a reproductive phase, whether that is with Giardia and Coccidia, which are microscopic, and it's an asexual, just splitting type nature, or whether we have worms where they will feed for 2 to 4 weeks and then mature worms will lay eggs. Either way, those reproductive offspring will then attach themselves to the intestinal wall of your dog. And at that point, once they're attached, a lot of times you'll see certain symptoms. That's where we get diarrhea symptoms because it causes all sorts of stress. And your dog, especially with Giardia or Coccidia, will get watery diarrhea because there's stress going on in the intestinal walls. After we have reproductive phase, you have at that point a shedding. And so some of those mature worms or Giardia or Coccidia will actually release. The dog will then go to the bathroom, the feces will pass through, and they will shed millions of eggs, millions of cysts, your Giardia or Coccidia, and that will then go back in the environment. So you have a dog, he goes to the bathroom outside. If he has Giardia or Coccidia, he then passes those eggs out into the environment, onto grass, into water. And that is where those eggs will become dormant again until they get an opportunity to be ingested and we perpetuate the problem. And so I wanted to explain the parasite life cycle because that's kind of the basics. That's kind of how we start to understand how we get rid of it. How do we get rid of a parasite? And also understand the general relationship with dogs and parasites, and understanding that this relationship, this intimate relationship between a parasite and a dog has been going on for thousands of years. It's a very problematic but natural thing that has happened in the wild for thousands of years. And that is one of the reasons why we can try and we can medicate, but it's not always 100% successful because the life cycle of a parasite is so connected and reliant on a dog or some kind of other mammal to totally eradicate. So one of the things that we need to think about when we understand the parasite life cycle is that there has always been this intimate relationship between dogs and canines, whether it go all the way back to a wild dog, and parasites. What we can assume is that parasites have existed for thousands of years and they will continue to exist. We will assume that every puppy has had parasite exposure at some point. One of the things I didn't explain within this life cycle is that sometimes these eggs or cysts, instead of going through the feces, when a mother is lactating and the puppies are nursing up the mom, sometimes those eggs will be actually released into the milk stream. They will go directly to the puppies where they will be infected with either a Coccidia or a Giardia, and puppies are directly exposed to parasites. So one of the things we need to understand with this life cycle is that puppies will always be exposed to parasites. One of the things we do with that information as adopters, as breeders, is understand that we need to have a prevention plan, just a medicated prevention plan that assumes that the puppies that we have are infected or could be potentially infected with the parasite. Okay, so the bad news on the information we've covered so far is that most probably all dogs have had parasites at some point. We should assume, if we're responsible, we should assume that a puppy has a parasite so we can treat it. The good news is we understand that, and so we have the option. We have a lot of weapons in the war against parasites. And so we should assume we should implement a responsible prevention plan. And so I wanted to go over some of the tools that we use to make sure that even if a puppy has a parasite, we're able to get rid of that during the time that they're with us. And so we have our parasite plan, and it is fairly complicated, but I wanted to go over every medication just so you guys understand. So if your dog has a parasite, you can understand the specific medications, what mode of action they are, and specifically what parasite are they designed to eliminate or most effectively eliminate. So the first treatment plan that I wanted to go over is Pyrantel. And the thing that you need to know about Pyrantel is that Pyrantel is extremely safe. Kronk is being adventurous. Kronk, come here. Come sit with me. Come here. Come on, sit. So Pyrantel is extremely safe. It's specifically used against roundworms and hookworms. And it's just a really moderate treatment plan that is easy on young puppies. And so one of the things that you don't want as a breeder with a puppy that is 2 weeks old is to be infested with roundworms and hookworms. And so you need a safe, effective way to kind of eliminate those parasites. And so we give Pyrantel at week 2 because it is safe, and then we'll follow it up with week 4 and week 6, specifically for more of the worms, the roundworms, the hookworms. Pyrantel is a really good, has really good active ingredients to go after those kind of parasites. The second thing I want to talk about is toltrazuril. And that is specifically, that's something we've kind of discovered the last 5 or 6 years, that is specifically really effective against coccidia. So if your puppy has coccidia, toltrazuril is bar none, the best medication for coccidia. It's not something that a lot of vets prescribe. Some do if they know, but coccidia with toltrazuril, very effective. We will hit, because coccidia is so aggressive and it is hard to sometimes get rid of, we will actually do two treatments, one mode of action, week 6 and week 9. And so we really want to, if a puppy gets reinfected or something, we really want it to go after that coccidia again at week 9 with a toltrazuril. The next 2 we often will use in a combination. So we'll go a metronidazole fenbendazole combo. But I did want to talk about each one specifically because they both have a job. Metronidazole is specifically for Giardia. It's very effective against Giardia. That's what we use it for. Fenbendazole is similar to Pyrantel, but different. It's a little more aggressive, where I would not give a fenbendazole to a week 2 puppy. But it's wide ranging in that it's similar to Pyrantel, that it's wide ranging, just a little bit more aggressive. So you're gonna go after your hookworms, your tapeworms, things like that. And just make sure that you've properly eliminated those. A lot of times we will combine metronidazole and fenbendazole and hit our puppies at week 7, at week 9, and then lastly, we will send that combination home, fenbendazole and metronidazole, home with the puppy. So usually all of our bulldog puppies go home at 10 weeks old, and we've covered that for a variety of reasons, but we feel like a 10-week-old puppy is finally mature enough to safely go to their new home. One of the things we want to make sure we do, though, even though we've had a very comprehensive parasite plan, one of the things we want to make sure that we send a parasite prevention plan home with our adopters is because of the nature and the life cycle of a parasite. We explained and we talked a little bit about how a parasite sometimes can go dormant. And so one of the things we're trying to do with a dormant parasite that possibly could be in the intestinal tract of a puppy that goes home, one of the things that activates a parasite like Coccidia, I don't have that up there right now, but like Coccidia and Giardia, is stress. One of the most stressful things that can happen to a puppy is they go from our home to your home as an adopter, and that stress really activates a potential dormant parasite that could be in the intestinal tract. So that's good and bad. One, it's good because if it does get activated, we can then take action. We'll send the metronidazole fenbendazole combo home with you, and then what that can do is that activated parasite then can be eliminated through that action. And so I kind of wanted to just give you guys a very, very detailed, like we got in the weeds with this, very, very detailed plan of what we actually do. And I wanted to kind of communicate through that a couple different aspects. One, parasites and a properly implemented parasite plan is extremely orderly. And you can kind of see, like it's by the week, it's every single week. It's orderly and it's organized. And so one of the things that if a breeder struggles with parasites and they struggle with, coming home with positive parasites, one of the things is sometimes breeders are not organized enough. Like they'll forget to do that, and then a puppy will get reinfected. They didn't properly eliminate that parasite. And so one of the first things, if you're a breeder or you're looking for a breeder, look for a breeder that is organized and has these plans implemented on a weekly schedule. And then lastly, and I didn't cover this, but this is huge. Outside of medication, the very, very most important thing that you can do as a breeder is to make sure everything you have around your puppies is clean. All your equipment, all your dishes, if you have a crate, any kind of environment that you have, Kronk is misbehaving, any kind of environment that you have with your puppies, it needs to be clean because it goes back to the life cycle of a puppy with a parasite. If we understand the life cycle of a parasite, one of the most common ways that a parasite is passed to another puppy is through feces, is through dirty water and things like that. So if the area in which you're raising puppies is not cleaned regularly, you're going to have issues with reinfection. And so if I could summarize the most important factors, is all of this, is all your tools as medication, but it's also just being organized. It's just being clean. Those are some of the really effective ways to make sure that you're properly deworming all of your puppies. Now that we have gone over our prevention plan, comprehensive prevention plan, I kind of wanted to also touch base on one other thing that keeps ringing in my mind as I'm shooting this video, just the truth and the reality of a comprehensive prevention plan, eliminating parasites, and then this tension as an ethical breeder on how you raise puppies. The best way to eliminate parasites when you're raising bulldog puppies or any kind of puppies for that nature is absolutely medication. So like a plan like this, but then also isolation. If you can isolate, and we understand the life cycle of parasite, if you can isolate a puppy, there's no chance for reinfection. And so if you really want to get rid of a parasite, it's medication and isolation. And so the most effective way to eliminate parasites would be take a 5-week-old puppy after they're weaned from their mom and stick them in a cold metal crate and leave them there till 10 weeks. And they would never get reinfected with, most likely, they wouldn't get reinfected with a parasite because there's no interaction with other puppies. I'd like to contrast that to, an ethical breeder understands parasite prevention is just one aspect of proper breeding. And so there's a little bit of tension that's involved where some of the factors that we care about dearly are socialization, interacting with a puppy with a mother, the puppies interacting with each other, and just that cognitive development that a bulldog can have, learning to live with another puppy, learning to live with mom. One of the things that does, obviously, is introduce it to a little more risk. As an ethical breeder, my number one priority, is to develop our puppies and socialize them. And so number 1B is to make sure they don't have parasites. But number 1 is always going to be to make sure they grow up and live in an environment that is developmental. And so the last thing you want to do is stick a puppy in a crate for 5 weeks until they're ready to go home. Even though it's the most effective way to eliminate parasites and eliminate and kind of guarantee that you won't have any issues, I don't think it's actually the most responsible way. And so we have chosen maybe a dual way: be orderly, be clean, be disciplined, but also we're gonna let our puppies interact with each other. We're gonna let our puppies interact with mom. And if we have to suffer the consequences, so be it. Okay, so let's say we have completed our comprehensive prevention plan. The puppy is now 10 weeks old and it's going home to its adopter. And that's usually the time period that we let them go home, is around 10 weeks old. One of the first things that you will do once you get your puppy home, and this is one of our requirements, is that you go get a vet exam. Part of that exam is almost always some type of fecal test. And I wanted to cover 2 very, very different fecal tests. One that I prefer, one that I have a little bit of problems with, but I wanted to explain those 2 of what is going on when that vet does a fecal test and what are the differences between the 2 tests. And so the first test, fecal test, that the majority of vets do, and thank goodness, the majority of vets do, is a fecal float test. And a fecal float test is where they actually take a sample, they put it under a scope, and they are examining that fecal matter for parasites. So one of the things that you need to understand with a fecal float is it's instant, it's in real time. It is actually analyzing the thing that's coming out of your dog. And so one of the things, if a puppy has Giardia, it's going to pass the cyst, right? Actively pass the cyst in its feces. We're gonna see that in a sample. And so one of the positives is that it's actually in real time. If your dog is positive, it's gonna be shedding most likely. One of the negatives, and this is why we enter into the antigen test, one of the negatives is sometimes, even if your dog is positive with Giardia, it is not shedding, right, the cysts. Or Giardia, Coccidia, those are the two we're kind of focusing on. If it's positive with one of those parasites, sometimes it's just not shedding. Sometimes it's not going out of the feces, it's actually staying in the intestinal tract. And so that's why sometimes a fecal float is viewed as not 100%, right? And so that enters into an antigen test. Sometimes we call an antigen test. Antigen test became super well known during the COVID era, right? But sometimes we call an antigen test an ELISA test or a PCR test. But basically what it is it's measuring antigens in the fecal matter. And so what that is, an antigen is actually a protein that is created by your parasite. And so it's almost residue from that parasite. It's evidence that there was a parasite there at some point. And that's where, in my mind, some of the problems come up. The proteins that the antigen test detects, right? Some of the antigens will actually last up to 6 months in the intestinal tract in a feces sample in the intestinal tract of a puppy. And so sometimes when an antigen test comes back positive, it is not that the dog is actually positive in the present, but it's actually recording a positive from a sickness that was 6 months ago. And so one of the things that is important to remember, if your vet does choose to do an antigen test, it does not give an accurate understanding of what is going on in current times with your puppy. If you want accurate understanding of what your puppy actually has right now, you go with a fecal test. Now, with that backing up, I do think an antigen test has a place, is a tool. Sometimes if you have a dog with undocumented medical records and things like that, an antigen test is a great way to piece together what that dog has had or what it might be currently suffering on based on its past. One of the things that I don't think makes as much sense with an antigen test is if you have a puppy that has a clear medical documented record sheet, a prevention plan, like we went over the life cycle of a parasite, we went over the prevention plan. If it has that prevention plan and it's been medicated from week 6 to week 7 to week 8 to week 9, and even maybe has parasite prevention when the adopter goes home, an antigen test doesn't necessarily make as much sense. Because we are assuming from a knowledge base of what a parasite life cycle is, we are always assuming that there has been a parasite in the past. So when it comes back positive, we can assume that is because it did have a parasite at one point. One of the things that I think is very inaccurate is when a vet gets an antigen test that's positive, comes back and says, well, your dog has Giardia, and so we have to do additional medication. We have to do more fecal tests. We have to do this and put them on like a weekly plan that they have to come back multiple times based on that positive test. And I think that's incredibly inaccurate because what the body of knowledge, the evidence that we have is that most probably it had a parasite. Most probably when we look at the body of work of the medical history is that it's been properly treated. And if there is no actual symptoms now, there's no need to medicate for the future. And so rather than rely on an antigen test, which I do think has a point or a place in certain instances, just not with puppies, I would rather go with a fecal float exam and to look at actual real-time data. In addition to that, you always look at symptoms. So if your dog has loose stool, that's an indicator. And then lastly, you look at what has been done in the past. What's a treatment plan that has been done? And if you have a vet that is, or a breeder that is disciplined and organized and has been diligent in taking that puppy through that prevention plan, a lot of times that is all you need is a fecal float and looking at symptoms. And so that's just a really good big picture understanding of the two options, what both tests brings to the table and why I would prefer a fecal float test. If you do want an antigen test or your vet does, understand the very nature of an antigen test. Don't get overly excited if it comes back positive because it doesn't actually give you data in real time. That is all I have for this video. Hopefully that whether you're an adopter that is looking for research or whether you're an adopter that actually has a puppy that has Giardia, hopefully this educational video helped you guys. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.